Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach?
It's great. Beautiful day today. The kids have off school, so they're at various camps today, and it's a good one.
Camp time. Yeah, it's school holidays for me, though they probably are not that aware of that. Because they've been off school for quite a while now, thanks to a little virus cruising around the place. But never mind, we're doing all right. And something we haven't talked. I think we talked a little bit about air quality, but people are talking a lot about ventilation and how to get kids back into schools safely. And I'm pleased to hear lots of discussion about ventilation, but that's probably a topic for another episode.
Yeah, a really important one for sure.
Yeah, but it is
Very
good that people are thinking
House.
about, the impact that buildings have on health, and particularly things like airflow, not just the typical things like do they keep the water out and do they keep you warm, but how do they actually operate from a more of a building science point of view, which is kind of relevant to what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into this great and very exciting interview for us, we've got a few people to thank for bringing us the Passive House podcast.
We do. So everything we do at the Accelerator comes thanks to support from our sponsors. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxtingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors and SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So thank you, sponsors.
Awesome. Well, pretty significant guest on this week's feature interview. Give us a quick introduction of who you've been speaking to, Zach.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Katrin Klingenberg of Phius for the interview today, which is super exciting. Phius is a nonprofit organization based in Illinois that is committed to making high-performance passive building the mainstream market standard. Katrin is co-founder and executive director there and has been a major force in introducing passive building and passive house throughout the United States and beyond, and also training a rapidly growing community of practitioners here. So I hope everyone enjoys my interview with Kat. Well, welcome. I'm here with Katrin Klingenberg, the co-founder and executive director of Phius. Welcome to the Passive House podcast, Katrin. It's such an honor to have you here.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm glad we can finally have our conversation. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start by a note of appreciation. Like many, I was introduced to Passive House through you. I guess 1 degree removed, because I was introduced to Passive House when I joined Hammer in Hand, the construction company based in Portland. And the co-owner at the time, Sam Hagerman, who recently passed away, sadly, had just taken the training from you in Seattle with a number of other Northwest Passive House pioneers, and was just electrified by the experience and by this. He described it, Passive House, as the unified field theory of construction for him, that it brought together all these kind of disparate elements that had been floating in his mind and put it together in this cohesive way that guided by physics, guided by building science. And of course that changed, the course of all of our careers and all of our lives and my lives. And so that's that ripple effect that you've had in North America is really profound. And I am grateful for that work that you've been doing for a while now.
Well, Zach, that brings back some really nice memories. Like that class that Sam attended, that was actually, I think that was in 2009 or 2010. It was one of the first classes, 2 or 3. And I remember so clearly how Sam waltzed into the classroom because, of course, he was fashionably late.
Oh, yes.
And then kind of like made a big entrance, like squeezed himself through everything. And he stopped like the entire class in its track.
That sounds about right.
It was brilliant. And it's so burned into my mind. And ever since we became really good friends. And I'm really glad you're mentioning him here. And I hope we can talk a little bit about honoring him at the conference as well. So I miss him a lot. It's really sad. And he has done so much for the community. And you too. I mean, you two together as a team, you really took the bull by the horns, and like all those like fabulous videos that you created under the Hammer in Hand banner, and that we were then allowed to use during the CPHC training. So really the whole effort is a really great kind of like, or started at least as a really great grassroots effort. And as you mentioned, there are plenty other like all-stars, pioneers from the Northwest who were in this first class, like Tessa and Dan. And nobody could have done this alone. This is really an amazing effort that we're seeing to come to fruition now, right?
Yeah. And with not a moment to lose, for sure.
Mm-mm.
So
10 more years to go.
Yeah, exactly. Or was it 9?
Yeah.
And a lot of those luminaries that we're talking about in the Northwest will be at the Tarrytown conference, which is this week.
Yes.
Please tell the listeners about the Phius Con and why they should join us. I can't wait to be there.
Yeah, so I am really super excited for so many reasons. Like for one, as we mentioned earlier, it has almost been 2 years since we all saw each other in Washington, D.C. for the last annual North American Passive House Conference. And so then last year, we were supposed to have our 15th annual, so big jubilee.
Right.
And then, of course, that got kind of like rear-ended by COVID. So that couldn't happen. And now we're still in Tarrytown. And it's looking really great. So people are excited. We officially have sold out of tickets. So sorry if you don't have one. Then
awesome.
There are still a few tickets left for pre-con and for the large building tour to New York City, and for the countryside Hudson Valley building tour. So there are still a couple of tickets up for grabs for that one. And we have a waiting list.
Yeah.
But we also have a bootleg series, virtual option. So you're not totally out in the rain. You can still join that way. And yes, so it's really, for us, it has become kind of like a pivotal year, because we have been doing a lot of soul searching and thinking during the COVID year. So being put on hold and having a forced break sometimes is not a bad thing, right? So you get to rethink what you're doing. You get to rethink about where you're coming from, where that has gotten you, and where you want to be going, and what is still left to do. So We took that year to plan, and also, as some of you have already seen, to rebrand and refocus and expand our vision, not without losing our center, our core. We remain firmly planted in this like passive building, unified field theory, building science, safety rope for people who have to execute, right? So still totally like solid in that, but there's a lot more that we can do, and we're starting to tackle it, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about it. So yeah, next week's conference is basically the best of the last years. It's really amazing to see. We have fantastic case studies, commercial case studies, multifamily affordable case studies. Retrofit is coming on strong. We've been involved with RMI and DOE for a while now, researching the industrialized retrofit effort that really has to happen nationwide. We have to retrofit so many buildings. It's just crazy. So we have a really strong session on that one, report on the latest and greatest of those efforts. We have, for the first time, we're really excited about like some passive building practice sessions, because more and more architects now really have come to and embrace the role of the CPHC and build it into their business model. So we had a whole bunch of submissions where people actually wanted to talk about how to do that and how to make that business model a success. So I'm really excited about that one. And then, of course, there are our hallmark sessions about technical. Phius is all about doing. Passive house is the concept, and Phius is the action of putting it into practice. And we have a really strong verifier session that talks about experiences in the field, really strong sessions on mechanical systems, on like the ventilation, vent hood hootenanny everybody has been asking about, right? That should be a lot of fun.
That's always such a hot topic.
Yes, and then of course we have our educational hootenanny as well. Education is coming on very strong, university education, and then all wrapped into like fantastic plenary. Eric Worling is going to kick us off. Boogie Band Boogie Band leader. That's how he liked to. He couldn't come as a representative of DOE because, they have a travel stuff. But as a person, he's going to be there and he's going to report on his personal experience. And of course, we have Joe Stiebrick closing us out with like a presentation on what wine has to do with building science. So I'm very excited about that one.
Yeah, I am too. I'm eager to understand the connections because I'm pretty well versed in red wine, so or at least no. I'm certainly not an expert, but I enjoy it. Yeah, that's amazing. That's great, and great. Congratulations on selling out. That's really fantastic. So, you mentioned the rebrand. So,
yes.
I mean, there's a new logo. The conference name is now PhiusCon, formerly known as the North American Passive House Conference. You've changed the capitalization of Phius, so it's now capital P and then lowercase Phius, so it's no longer reading as an acronym. And you've also refined the certification names. Well, first of all, I maybe for listeners who aren't up to speed. What are those certification names, and then say more, if you wouldn't mind, say more about this big rebrand, which looks wonderful.
Well, let's start with the rebrand,
okay,
and then let's get into the thought behind the new names for the certifications. So it's all interconnected, obviously. So the word and no longer the acronym. So we feel we have come into our own. People are seeing Phius as synonymous with passive building, as I mentioned earlier, like the action of putting things into practice. And we're pretty proud. I mean, we're getting incredibly great reviews for our certification diligence. The team is just absolutely fantastic. We've always seen ourselves as kind of like the lifeline on a pretty difficult walk up the mountain, right? Like, so building science and quality assurance is really important to ensure that the buildings are designed correctly and that they perform in the end. And so on the back end, there's a lot of work that has to be done in setting the standards accurately, reevaluating the algorithms and the modeling tool, garbage in, garbage out, like it's only as good as you make it. And then the feedback loop of like, how well are we doing with all these like quality assurance processes in place? Are they easy enough? Are they simple enough for people to implement? Are they becoming a hurdle themselves? Like how can we facilitate all this, right? So, and as we were doing this, we realized really yet again what the secret sauce of Passive House really is. And in my mind, it's the adjacencies of the systems. So we're designing with such precision that we're tapping into all these free energies that are available between the different systems that go into a building. And if you pay attention to those and you plan them into your process, you actually can harvest them. So one of our early conferences, the tagline was, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's exactly what this talks about. So now we've been focused on the building, and I think we really cracked that nut. We have some really awesome standards by now. We have a great tool. We have a great quality assurance process. So we've really proven that we can deliver buildings that actually perform within 7% plus or minus of what we had predicted. So what is still left to tap into in the same spirit of like the whole systems and adjacencies and synergy design is like now the building is such a core element within the design of the new renewable energy grid. And you, Zach, you've been working on that and like pushing shift zero and like we really need to get to absolute zero. How do we do this, right? So yeah. That's really what we're focusing on right now. We're really trying to kind of like harvest these additional adjacencies of building design once the building gets plugged into the grid. What can the grid do to optimize the grid design even further?
Yes, so important. Yeah. And so what is that? And you've launched an updates on the certifications. So we're not just talking about renaming certifications. There's also been a tremendous amount of work done recently to update the certifications. What are those certifications now?
Yeah. So again, also in like an effort. So again, back to the rebrand real quick. We're trying to really communicate now further out, like beyond the building community, beyond the already like converted or the building scientists, the engineers, the architects. We need to get to everybody. We need to make sure that everybody understands that this touches you, even if you're an artist or if you're a doctor or whatever, right? Like everybody has a home and everybody should understand that the safety of that home, the resilience and the way it's built, the health, that is really important to all of us. And the better we build them, the more we can all work together to meet our climate action goals. So in that effort to become more relatable to pretty much everybody, we created this new kind of like hopefully hip looking logo. I personally am envisioning like maybe like some sneakers with a logo on it or like some high performance gear, it's like maybe like partnering with REI or something, some fun stuff. So that even people who don't understand the building science, who will kind of intuitively feel that this is something really great to get behind and help us to promote, and that really has to become mainstream. So in the same vein, we have renamed our certifications because we also realized that they were kind of like science-centric. So if you remember, the old name was Phius Source Zero. And pretty much anybody outside of the community is like, what the hell is that? So in the name of like being more relatable, more understanding to the layman person, we have like nixed that technical term source and like now going straight with Phius Zero. Phius Core is still here. Phius Zero is now our like main certification because we all understand now we have to go to zero, probably absolute zero, and net zero is not even good enough. But we also want to maintain our kind of legacy certification, and that's Phius Core. But really, we've seen we can do it. We can do zero. We're here. It's cost effective. Please go to Phius Zero if you can. If you cannot, Phius Core is still solid as like basically zero energy ready. So, and then beyond that, we also realized like we've always had a retrofit certification where we're like, well, we don't have a name. So how do people know? So essentially it's like, all right, we need a dedicated name for retrofits, and teams actually like that because it's a harder thing to do, and they want that recognition that they're actually tackling a retrofit, right? So, and then last but not least, we're also thinking about launching the Phius Core COM and Phius Zero COM to let people know, like, hey, we also have a commercial certification. Again, same problem. We've always had it. We had this like great idea, like one certification system covers all, but then the market doesn't understand that.
Right.
So now we have those labels, and we are ready to come forward with a marketing effort to help people understand that these are great goals to go after and great labels to get. And it will highlight you and your leadership in your business. And so hopefully this will help to further promote all the good work that we're doing.
No kidding. You mentioned a few times the retrofit, how important retrofits are, and this retrofit, the label for retrofit, and is Revive is the label, right? I'd love for you to share more about this certification and your ideas for scaling up retrofits, which is the big question for all of us.
So that's how we started, right? Like, so essentially saying like, well, the way we thought about the standard was there's a fixed number, global carbon reductions, and we have to meet that. And we calculate where that sweet spot is from a cost effectiveness perspective for each climate. And therefore also old buildings have to meet that standard. I mean, so we basically were not cutting retrofits much slack, except for where the building would meet the ground or where they are like thermal bridges that are really significant, and people would get like a credit for that. That would still amount to like a significant difference. So it's not the same, right? So, but that said, so we all have evolved, like all the work that has gone into the industrialized retrofit project over the years, we've learned a lot. So we're actually currently working on a retrofit pilot. So essentially, Revive has evolved into being Phius Revive as we always have done it. And we also now have a Phius Revive pilot. So another Phius Revive pilot, we're slightly altering our framework of thinking about retrofits. And Graham has come up with like a really great blog post on that.
About a door.
He's coming up with like exactly the framework of the ADORB.
Which is
and
awesome.
It's totally cool actually, and it's really thinking outside the box. So because once you get into like massive upscaling of retrofits, there's one big sticking point, and that is the upfront embodied carbon in all of those components, right? Like just envision like the entire building stock to be retrofitted to, let's say, passive building standards in 10 years, we'll keep the planet in the butt with all the carbon that just goes into producing all this stuff. Like, so maybe we can figure out how to industrialize and do it all like in no time, but we can't because we have this limit on carbon. So, so there's a new framework emerging that we really have to come up with like an assessment of our buildings and our improvements, including, of course, the embodied carbon, but not only the embodied carbon, also like the transportation and the labor and like the entire supply chain, basically.
Yeah.
And this very quickly becomes a really big, complex ball of wax. And the carbon accounting that is available right now is fraught. I mean, it's like it's really hard to do, and it doesn't get at like all the other adjacencies that, as far as we know, right now we're all still like a fossil fuel powered economy. So every dollar essentially has carbon in it, is powered by carbon, and that was kind of like the driver behind Graham's idea that maybe we can take a dollar value and assign the carbon value to that dollar, because as of right now, that dollar represents carbon. So that is essentially, in a nutshell, his idea. And then use that to assess the right amount of upgrades for buildings, of course, not without giving up on the resiliency. So the resiliency line we're going to hold, but we might back off under this pilot a bit more on envelope upgrades because of all these other kind of adjacencies that go into the equation.
Right. Looking at embodied carbon, as you mentioned, and transportation and the economy and electrification, production. And then bringing in the social cost of carbon as a way to bring in the dollar value of carbon emissions, and using all of that to then narrow down to the most cost, the lowest dollar figure, right? For action.
Yes.
It's we should. I'll include a link to that blog post in the show notes, and there are a couple of other recent blog posts we should link to as well, so people can dive into this. But it's a really, I think, powerful way and well explained with some straightforward math that even I can understand. That I think people will enjoy.
So fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like we're kind of trying to figure this out. So.
Yeah. And these are, and grappling head on with big questions that anybody in the building decarbonization space is thinking about, and it's not easy to figure out how to weigh these different priorities, the operational carbon, embodied carbon, electrification, all of it. So it's exciting stuff. So one of the things that you've mentioned a couple of times is this idea of a safety line or a safety rope, which is I think a really important metaphor as we think about scaling up high passive buildings, and making sure that scale up, it doesn't create unintended disasters in the built environment. And as I was going through the certification guidebook, it struck me as exactly that. It's that kind of safety line, as well as like a tool for the scale up, right? So, and to be specific, you're in the guidebook, you're including little like flags, like, hey, watch it. Here are some important building science pitfalls to avoid in building assemblies, and this is what you should be thinking about as you are doing airtightness, and like all these pieces. I'm not sure what this is, if this is a question or maybe just a comment that I was struck by this and how important that is. I guess what are the other ways, to turn this into a question, what are the other ways that you are extending that lifeline? Or that safety rope, I should say, because I know this is top of mind for you. And I also know that Phius buildings, passive buildings, have been experiencing, exponential growth. And we hope that will continue, but that means that there's risk.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk, and that's why it's so important that we're doing it safely. Some colossal failures could completely and totally tank everything, and we've always said this from the beginning. And our mission, as you know, has been right from the get-go to make passive building mainstream, and that is such a nice little sentence, but that really is a huge market transformation effort. We've often compared it to turning a tanker around. And so we started with the technical safety line. And that was essentially what we worked on over the last 10 years to get that really, really sharpened and down and right. And also the detailed calculations and the precision of carbon accounting, right? So zooming back out to our big overall kind of motivation here, we're trying to avert the climate crisis. And while we're doing this, we're trying to mitigate our living conditions too. So so we've done this. The technical part is really nice and sharp right now. So, but as we're considering like the next step of building the renewable grid, think back to the Jeremy Rifkin keynote in Washington, D.C. That really shook everybody up. Like, wow, yes, this is like a massive conversion of our entire economy, our entire energy supply system, the way how we think about these things. So from our perspective, so if we want to be that like guidebook safety rope or line, we, in anticipation, assuming that we're going to be successful with our efforts of trying to convince everybody that everybody should be doing this safely, we need to be able to scale up. So not only our branding is aimed at scaling up and bringing more and more and everybody into the tent, but also our certification services and safety rope services, they need to scale up. And lots of last year was spent to upgrade our processes. We've incredibly grown, as you mentioned, like we've experienced exponential growth with an incredibly tiny team.
Yeah.
And like all of our systems were kind of like basically, we were joking, they were like duct taped together, right? So we really took this year to revamp everything, to identify our internal architecture and translate that into very sophisticated customer relations management system, which is scheduled to go live in December. And we have also invested in a new website, which I will be able to show at the plenary. Very exciting with like additional functionality and for people to have portals, much easier to get to searchable databases, resources. I mean, it's just like, you'll see. It's going to blow everybody's mind, I think. It's really amazing, and I think this is another reason for renaming the conference too. For us, it's essentially like year one of phase two. Mm-hmm. We've tooled up, and our title for the conference is we're exactly meaning it. Like, so emissions down, we got that. Now we're ready to scale up. We're ready to go. We need everybody on board to help us to do that. And our systems are set and to go, and we keep hiring. And then also the effort with ASHRAE 227P, if and when that comes to fruition. And I hear the draft is supposed to come out soon. That is amazing. So that could be a really intense shortcut to making, indeed, passive high-performance buildings mainstream. And if that happens, we need to be ready for a massive scale-up effort of those safety services and building science and all of that good stuff. So it's a challenge. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good challenge. And
that's what you signed up for.
It's incredibly hopeful. It's like when we started 10 years ago, it's like, man, this is more aspirational. Can we really do this? Mm. And now that we've built the systems to support it, I feel like, we can actually really do this. This is going to be good.
That's exciting. So two things. One, ASHRAE 227P, for folks who don't know, is basically a living not living building. Where did that come from? Living building standard would be great too. A passive building standard by ASHRAE. So ASHRAE has a tremendous impact and influence and authority. So it will be a big step. It sounds like. The other thing is, reflecting back 10 years ago, just the last 10 years have been intense on many levels, and we're experiencing climate change in a kind of like smack you in the face kind of way now that we weren't 10 years ago. We also are at a totally different place in terms of the potential for solutions now, and I think that on the passive buildings front, that's thanks to your work and the work of many and on the clean energy side too. Solar energy has gone down in price by 85% in 10 years, something.
Yeah, amazing.
So we're in a sprint and a race. So, and I have really admired the clarity that Phius has been bringing to this relationship between buildings and clean energy. And you've already and the transition that needs to happen. Decarbonization, I think, is ultimately what we're after. And you've talked about a lot of those interconnections that you've been exploring. One that we haven't touched on yet is the grid interactive efficient buildings, the GEB. What's that about?
Yeah, that's super exciting. So that's really our next research frontier. We're working on developing a microgrid Phius block certification. That could be as small as a nanogrid. You probably have seen John Sarda's presentations on his project Solux Alpha in San Francisco. He pioneered that. So it's very much based on that idea. Again, and also tapping into the idea that there are more adjacencies to harvest if you tap into those technologies as well. So we're looking at direct current, how much more savings can we get from that? How can like the microgrid design help with tap into more like systems adjacent savings and all that kind of stuff. So that is also all very exciting. And so while we're researching that, the nice kind of like, I don't know how to say this. It's great to see how the building is actually, it becomes the capacitor of the grid, the passive building, right? Like if you have a crappy building, it can't do that. So if you have a building at the core of this new digital grid that has low loads, you have all kinds of like other opportunities, again, adjacencies of systems that it can tap into, like load shifting, load shedding. Normal buildings can't do that. So once it's really all about holistic design, and back to Sam Hagerman, the unified field theory of buildings. It's kind of like coming to it's coming into full picture now. All these different elements that go into the energy systems design and what role the building really plays and how critical that role really is. So being a building kind of fanatic, whatever, I love buildings. I'm thrilled that buildings are in the spotlight and that they can do that for this challenge. I'm really excited about.
Yeah. And building energy efficiency being recognized for its power as a form of distributed energy, and how that can add resilience to the grid and make the transition that we want to see easier. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that develop, and that's also super important work. This is
and the same thing is true. So there would be like a guidebook for that as well, right? Like that's what we don't have right now. It's all about like, how exactly am I going to do this now? How am I going to do it?
Right.
How am I tap into that action of employing that new strategy here?
Yeah. We've covered a lot. Is there anything else though that we've missed that you want to share or add before we close up? I know you have a lot on your plate today as you get ready for the conference.
Yeah. So one thing has been on my mind, like I've been working with Doug Farr quite a bit over the last year, Farr Associates, and he has been driving the Carbon Free Chicago initiative here. And he keeps telling me like, Kat, this is not good enough. Like the whole technical stuff, not everybody understands this. So we really need to get to everybody, and we need to motivate people from the bottom up. And that is kind of like still in the back of my mind. Like how can we get really to everyone and make clear to everyone that this is that everybody can make a difference, that every little bit counts, educate people about what they can do in their own personal lives, decarbonize their own surroundings, friends, living situation, and enable them to do that and have fun while doing it, you know. So that's kind of like my side project. Like as a scientist, I have a little bit of difficulty thinking about this, but maybe more parties or more like meeting people who are not building science geeks. That might be a good first step.
Right. Thank you so much, Kat. This has been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Tarrytown in a few days.
Yeah, me too. Can't wait, Zach. Thank you so much.
Well, great interview, Zach. I'm very pleased that you managed to get Kat on the show. It's been a little while coming, so awesome to have her as a guest on the podcast. I learned a lot about that, and particularly here we talked about Phius, the fact that it's certainly more familiar with people in the North America, but there were some really strong themes there that make what Kat and all of Phius are doing really relevant across the board. But before I get into it, what were some outtakes from you?
Oh boy, it was a little bit of a walk down memory lane since as I mentioned in the interview, I was introduced to Passive House via Kat and my friend and colleague Sam Hagerman like 11 years ago. So definitely like flashbacks to that time and the incredible growth that's happened. I mean, I think that's one of the pieces that is really comes home is that the last decade has been one of tremendous progress in high performance building. That's absolutely that's been happening at Phius, and it's really heartening to see that, and to see their role in grappling with these really important questions about how we can most kind of optimally decarbonize buildings and balancing operational carbon and embodied carbon and electrification and all these big questions around transportation to make that happen. So there's lots of really great thinking and work happening there at Phius.
Yeah, that's a fascinating discussion about trying to optimize particularly renovations, because it's never as simple as just putting in the best products that you can get from a thermal point of view, because that might mean, particularly for us down here in a little island in the South Pacific, it might mean shipping some sort of petrochemical-based insulation product from halfway around the world, simply because it's got the highest R value. But that doesn't necessarily make sense when you step back and think, well, what are the embodied carbon emissions involved in getting that product to this site versus what we're going to benefit long term. It's a little it's challenging because that muddies the water in terms of it just being a black and white decision about going for the very best you can. But these are really important conversations to have, and it's changing all the time. And I guess that's something that Phius is really good at is thinking about what's relevant, what's changing in terms of new products that are coming through, and how can we learn and adjust to provide the best advice for a particular project.
It is. I think that Phius is being nimble and also creative in thinking about how to answer those questions that you're talking about. And I mentioned that we'll share in show notes the blog post by Graham Wright about the ADORB is his acronym, which is great, about looking at balancing the different, trying to figure out a way to understand the carbon implications of these different elements of building of a retrofit and different potential actions you take in a retrofit, and then using that kind of math-based understanding to help guide decision making. Yeah. It's really and he's embarking on this journey. It's part of the Revive pilot that Kat alluded to, and it's that kind of it is messy, and there are a lot of moving parts. This is part of the key work of understanding how buildings interconnect with this big transition that we're doing.
Yeah.
So it's like we're expanding the boundary conditions, we're expanding our view to the rest of society and the economy, and it's a question that that needs to be grappled with at the certification level. It's also being grappled with by state governments. Like I know NYSERDA has been doing a bunch of thinking about this question. I know I've got colleagues here in the state of Washington who are doing similar stuff. I'm sure that that's happening in New Zealand, right? It's happening all over the place. It's like how do we deal with our existing buildings, and what role does passive building play in that? And I think it's clear that passive building and passive house both can play a really important role. And it's just the question is that, but what about embodied carbon?
Yeah.
What about the grid and transportation?
Yeah. But bringing it back to that sort of common currency of carbon, and Kat mentioned actually converting then carbon into dollar terms, into today's values, but having that as a central way to compare things is becoming more and more talked about. And that's a shift I see across the board in people really thinking about carbon kind of as a currency to do a cost benefit and do a life cycle analysis. And until quite recently, I've seen that as something kind of in the future, very specialist, a little bit opaque. And those things are still true to an extent, because we still haven't figured out agreed standards, and there are different people using different methods of calculating. But there's a lot more discussion about it. Something that I've become aware of recently is we have this financial disclosure mandate that's coming down the line, and it's going to be law for banks and financial institutions, insurers, which actually have a big impact on our building projects, because that's where all the money comes from. And they'll be required to disclose the impact of their lending on carbon emissions. And so whether we like it or not, whether average builders care about carbon on their projects, it's going to impact them, because there's going to be changes coming from the financial sector, which are going to drive some pretty significant change. So it's good to see people like those involved with Phius starting to provide tools for people to interact with that. A couple of things that I picked up on there. Well, I want to go back to my first statement about the relevance of Phius to us here in New Zealand, Australia, because a lot of people think, it's sort of mostly used in North America, but in some ways that question was answered for me very early on when Kat was running down the agenda for PhiusCon, and one of the highlight speakers there is Joe Steebrook, which puts it very squarely in the realm of building science. And I think that's the thing that unites us all, is physics, which works everywhere. It's a beautiful thing. But so much of what we do in the passive house world really brings building science to a practical level where it makes it achievable to be implemented in the real world. And that's enough said right there, really. All of what Phius is doing, all of what Kat and her team are doing are completely relevant wherever you are and wherever you're listening to this.
Right. I mean, this comes down to I think all of these questions that we're just talking about come down to physics and whether it's atmospheric physics or building physics, or the physics of generating electricity.
Yeah.
We can have many different takes on how to kind of bring that together into a certification, but there's that the grounding in science, I think, is what is as you say, universal and so important. And I know that Kat alluded to the ASHRAE 227P process that's going on, creating an ASHRAE-based passive building standard, passive house standard, is a place where those conversations, those science-based conversations are happening.
What does ASHRAE stand for, Zach?
The American Society of Heating and that's not fair.
It's not. I wrote it down. I'm cheating. It's the American Society for Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning. No one calls it that though. Everyone calls it ASHRAE, which is kind of the same as Kat said the same thing. No one talks about the Passive House Institute of US anymore. They talk about Phius, and that's cool. People see it now as a thing. They just know just Phius, same way they know ASHRAE. And I mention ASHRAE because we refer to it here in this part of the world. It is seen as one of the leaders in setting these standards. So if you haven't come across it before, you probably will have come across its influence, because ASHRAE influences codes, and I know some of the work that Jesse Clark and other colleagues, former colleagues, have done in Australia. A lot of codes in other parts of the world may be interpretations of ASHRAE codes, because it all comes back again to physics. There's no point in rewriting things when the physics is the same. They just have to fit into local regulations. So that's the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning, quite an influential body. And I know that some of the leading building scientists around the North America and around the world, in fact, have been involved in developing some of the standards. So it's very exciting to see a coming together of Passive House world and people like ASHRAE. Awesome. Anything else from you from that interview?
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing Kat and seeing the crew in Terrytown. And I'm happy for them that the conference is sold out. That's really great.
That is very impressive and good sign of the times and the growing interest. As you mentioned a couple of times, I think the exponential growth of Passive House, which we're certainly seeing around the world. So thank you for that. Thanks for bringing us that great interview, Zach, and for lining that up. And I just want to do a quick shout out to some of our listeners as well, because we received some good, some nice feedback, which is always very nice. And as I mentioned, you can get in touch with us via email, just podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com. And a few people reach out to me via LinkedIn, various other channels as well. We're pretty accessible online, at least when Facebook's up and running. So we've got some other people to know. We've thanked our other sponsors, but let's talk about other than the Phius Con, which you're heading to. What else we got coming up?
Well, we have on Tuesday, so Wednesday your time, the Passive House Accelerator Construction Tech program will feature Prefab Experts Hive Mind. So this is a sneak peek of the PhiusCon prefab panel. And so that we're going to have a bunch of practitioners and experts in passive house prefab come together on Tuesday and share their insights and have a great conversation. Good opportunity for folks to ask some smart questions as well. So join us for Construction Tech. Then on Wednesday, we will be hearing about North America's first fire hall to pursue passive house. This is the Vancouver Fire Hall number 17. And it's going to be a presentation. All sorts of really interesting kind of engineering questions come up around turning a fire hall or doing a fire hall as a passive house. And Scott Gomeshi, an engineer from the Integral Group, will join us on Wednesday, our time, Thursday, your time, for the showcase. So join us for that, please. Of course, we've got PhiusCon next week, and then coming soon, we also have the South Pacific Passive House Conference. So, as always, and the Getting to Zero conference in New York, presented by the New Buildings Institute. So we'll have links to all this info in the show notes.
Awesome. And for those that haven't been there recently, did you just do an update of the Passive House Accelerator website?
We did. The homepage is new. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Well, there's that. Yes. So we created an update of the homepage to better reflect the kind of weekly. We're sort of we've kind of become a little bit of a weekly publication, because we have these weekly events. We do weekly videos of those events. We do weekly podcasts. We also have a team headed up by Mary James doing original articles about projects. So the new website is better at sharing that weekly information and content, I think, and we're excited to have it up.
I'm just looking. One of the highlight feature articles right now is from our other colleague, Sydney Gladue, who's written
a great piece
about, passive resilience and heat wave. Very topical and going to be more and more so. So some great stuff there. And don't forget, there's heaps of resources that are shareable, including all the icons, imagery, and which I've used for helping to explain Passive House to other people. And I know that you did a lot of work on that, Zach, to make those Creative Commons for a lot of those resources. So
I'm glad to hear that they're useful.
Yeah, really cool stuff there. Awesome. I think that just about does it for this week. Once again, thanks for those getting in touch. Really great to hear from you. And also, if you are working on some interesting projects, or you know of some interesting projects, we'd love to hear about them. And maybe even get the people involved onto the show and have a talk about whether they're architects, builders, or even people who are in and experiencing Passive House projects. Then please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure others would as well. And we might line them up for a podcast interview. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.